Good morning, everyone. So welcome to our SAT prep class for this week. We're actually getting in the last few classes for this particular session, or section of the SAT prep class. So that kind of being said, today I do want to kind of recap a little bit about the different strategies, but mostly we're going to continue kind of our breakdown of different kinds of grammar concepts, just to give you a little bit of a refresher on some of the key ideas that get covered on this test for the writing and English, a writing and language test for the SAT. And then we also have some math that we can kind of look through the practice test. And if anyone has any questions, we can kind of go from there. So give me one moment. I want to share my screen. Okay. So for this week for homework, you were assigned practice test 3 was for homework from last week. And then we will have practice test 7 for this week. And then our final class is next week. Okay, so this is our second to last class. And we will, so if you have questions, please ask me, because if you don't, you're not going to get them answered unless you ask someone else or work privately with a tutor. Okay. So that being said, we're going to spend most of our time on practice test 3, kind of going through the questions today. And we will also kind of look at particular questions. Okay, so someone did ask, when do you take the test at the end of this? You need to speak to your school to find out if you're taking the test directly through your school, or if you are if you need to sign up and register independently. So your school should have that information. A lot of you, I mean, that's also why we kind of went over a little bit of the registration information, because you do have to actually register for the test, unless it's offered directly through your school. I think they do it as like you register through your school instead. Okay, so someone did think that you might take the test with this course. You may, but you need to speak to the director of your program, who's running the course at your school, because they would have that information for you, whether or not they've scheduled an exam for all of you, or if you need to sign up individually. The way it works for most students in general is that you have to actually go to the College Board's website, which is why I give you all those fun resources at the beginning here. Is to really you can go to the College Board website, the SAT, and you want to, you can go to explore their resources, look at upcoming testing dates, look at, they have practice tests, they have the Kaplan resources that are there that are free for students taking the test. And they have a lot of really great resources regarding SATs and college prep and AP exams, if you're taking any of those, or if you're taking really anything, like anything that the College Board oversees, especially like the SAT in particular, and college prep, that type of thing is on that website. You do need to explore that. It's also available in your textbook if you actually have the big blue book. I don't know if I have mine with me. Yes, I do. Yeah. So it's upside down, sorry. It's in this book, the registration information. So if you don't have a copy of this, you can still access all the free resources and information through the College Board's website. So this was a good question, because I think a lot of students might think that. But that's also why we stress to you to make sure that you get registered for the test, whether that's on that you have to do it individually or whether that's you're taking it as a group and it's organized through your school. It just depends. So you have to check with your program director specifically to find out if you need to register individually or if you're taking it after this class. So that wouldn't be something that I would directly deal with. But good question. Okay, so any other kind of general SAT questions before we kind of focus more on content again from anyone? Don't be afraid to ask a question. If you do have a question between now and our last class, feel free to send it to me, to ask me for clarification, and I can try to address it next week. But if you don't ask, I won't know that you have a question. So please ask. Okay. So without further ado, just to kind of, I guess it is a good thing to kind of recap. Remember that I gave everyone a copy of these notes. So everything that we've really been going through, I've provided resources for you. So you have all this information, and I know it is a lot of information, especially the additional resources, like the vocabulary practice, our YouTube channel for Embrace Tutoring, with information about taking diagnostic exams through Embrace, for the SAT or ACT or other exams. And then also just kind of going through the information, the bulk of information that there is about the SAT for students and for parents, and just kind of getting you up to speed of where you need to be for college admissions and the entrance exam with the SAT or ACT. In this case, we're focused on the SAT. Okay. So that all kind of being said, you do want to make sure that you keep this handy for yourself in terms of going back through, looking at the strategies that we've employed together, what we've kind of been working on. So in terms of strategies, kind of like the breakdown of the test. So the reading, that it consists of the reading test, the writing and language test, the math tests, the 2 math tests, the one that is calculator and one that is non-calculator. You tackle the non-calculator section first. What I also want to stress to you is that the more you practice simulating the testing experience, which can include if you're testing at home or testing in a center right now during the pandemic and you need to wear a mask, you want to start kind of thinking about possibly practicing with a mask, because it will affect your concentration level and the amount of oxygen that you can receive through so it's going to affect your overall performance in some cases. So you do want to kind of consider those factors when you are practicing. So you want to get used to it. So a lot of what I've been finding that happens, and other tutors have found that happen for students, is that they do their due diligence, they study, they practice, but come test day, they haven't practiced with a mask, and that impacts their score, and impacts their performance overall, because they're not used to it, and it throws them off basically, and they don't do as well as they would or had been doing had they been practicing with the mask the whole time. And getting that's only applicable if you're actually going to a testing site, like at a school, or other kind of one of the other testing sites offered by the College Board for this exam. But it is kind of something you want to keep in the back of your mind. And that includes too, like making sure that when you're practicing, you don't have your snacks all readily available for you and you're munching while you're doing your test. That's bad. Those are bad habits, because you're not going to be able to do that. And if your body is used to getting that kind of sustenance from to help fuel you through the test, when it's not your snack time, you're not your break time, you're going to throw yourself off. So you want to set yourself up for success by practicing the testing strategies and also simulating the test as much as possible. So test environment, that means sitting in a quiet room, having a clock at the front of your room so you can keep track of time, properly timing each section and not giving yourself extra time unless you're scheduled to take a test that deliberately gives you extra time. Okay. But it's in your best interest to practice exactly the way that you will be doing testing. So that means just having your testing materials on your desk. That means having extra like pencils and things prepared ahead of time when you go to practice. Okay. If you arrive late, that's okay. You'll have the video. So for anyone who arrives late, again, just remember you'll get a copy of the video when I send out the homework for this week. So you'll be able to see what you missed. What we've been kind of looking at, so in terms of your test day prep, the College Board text and the College Board's website also breaks down what you should do, what is required that you do, any kind of rules or regulations that they have about testing and test day prep. So you want to look into those. I think I provided those for test day in here somewhere. Maybe. Regardless, they're on the College Board's website. So if you go to the College Board's website, which I have several links in this document that you have access to, it will give you information. Actually, let's do that right now, and I can kind of show you. I'm going to stop sharing my other screen, and I will. Okay. So when you click this for the College Board's website for the SAT, you want to go to the SAT section of the College Board because they cover many different things. Okay, so you do want to be looking at things like registration, SAT dates and deadlines. So that means the deadlines that you need to meet in order to register for a particular test day. It also means checking updates regarding things like test center closings, especially because of the pandemic. Although I think they've been allowing students to test from home, I think in some instances. So it depends on what you register for, whether or not you're going specifically to a testing center or a school, or if they're being held at your school. I think for most of you are going to be taking the exam at your school, but I'm not entirely sure the specifics because that's managed by the director of your program, and your school, not me. Okay. So a lot of these resources, like featured articles, how to interpret your scores, registration tips, kind of view the test day checklist, what to expect on test day. A lot of these questions, a lot of your typical type of questions will be answered by the College Board through their website. Okay, so a lot of your kind of general type questions are going to be focused on here. So you can go, all of your practice tests are available online. That we've been sharing kind of the links of the published, publicly accessible practice tests for you. So you can continue to practice with them. You can always retake a practice test that you've already done in terms of adding additional practice. The more familiar you are with this test and how it's formatted, how it works, and what the different sections are and the kinds of questions you'll see, and the strategy, the more you work with your strategies, the easier this test is going to be. Okay. The more comfortable you will be with it and the more confident you will be on test day, and the better you'll do. Okay. So it kind of goes through a lot of different key ideas here. So do check this out if you haven't already. So I'm not going to kind of go through these resources because you definitely can do that. And I want to focus more on the content questions, which can be addressed in here, but they're not as specific as I'll go into them for you. They don't provide that in depth of a review for you. They do provide clarity through their Khan Academy resources. So if we go to the SAT, you could go to practice. So SAT Practice on Khan Academy has many free resources, and they can be personalized for your individual study. So look these up. There's a link on this page, okay, in here. And I think I also gave a link to Khan Academy, or I mentioned it in one of my notes to you. But definitely look this up for additional practice. There are tons of resources out there in terms of additional practice books if you're interested in purchasing those. Or I think local libraries should have copies that you might be able to borrow or to work from. Obviously, though, you couldn't write in the text like you could if you purchase the book because it's not yours. When you're borrowing it from a library, but you can go through and get additional practice, use it to kind of prepare you for the test. Okay. So there are a lot of different resources. They have study groups, they have on the College Board, they have a lot of different things for you. So do check it out if you haven't done so already. And yeah, so I mean, I don't really want to spend more time on that than now, but I hope that kind of addressed your questions. Regardless, I have notes about different resources and things in the notes that I sent out the first week of I was here for class, okay, which was your second week. So for today, what I really wanted us to kind of look at, so we're looking at practice test 3. I'm trying to think where I am with things. Okay, so if we look at practice test 3, we'll look at my annotations in a minute. But I would like everyone to look through your practice test from your homework from this past week and tell me if there are particular questions you want to go over from the reading test. Specifically, that's where we're going to start with. And then we'll move on to the writing and language test and then the math sections. So check right now. Everyone should have this available from your studies. It should have been sent to you. It was sent to you last week in the homework. So you have access to this test. So just let me know what you have questions on. It can be anything about the strategies. It can be specific questions and how to solve them, or how to find information in the text when you're not sure what it is you're looking for, or even if you are sure what you're looking for, like different things like that, how to best use your strategies to help you get ahead. Okay, so we'll spend a little bit of time on the reading test, and then we're going to move on to more grammar review with writing and language as we kind of go through the writing and language test section for practice test 3. So I will give you about like 2 minutes to kind of look through your questions just for the reading test and see if for the ones that you got wrong that you have questions on, or even ones you got right that you weren't maybe sure how you got them right, or why they were right and you had maybe made an educated guess on. So everyone can have until about 9:21. Or actually, I'll give you 3 minutes instead. So why don't we do 9:23? Or 9:20, 9:22. I'm sorry. It's first thing in the morning, so I'm not thinking in terms of my math skills immediately first thing in the morning in terms of minutes. So I haven't finished my first cup of tea yet, so that would be why. Which is important to actually kind of note if you need you need to, before you take the test, everyone, make sure you're eating healthily. Like, so the night before, you should do a little bit, like the day before your test, you should always do a little bit of review of your key concepts, looking over specific question types, just to remind yourself what they are and how to kind of approach those particular questions when you see them, and to kind of review your strategies for each section. You do not need to be doing a full practice test the day before. You should not, because I actually advise against it for most students, because you need to be rested, well rested before taking your test. Okay, so that means, if possible, not having a lot scheduled on your plate the day before, or the days kind of leading up to your SAT exam. I know that's not always possible, but it is in your best interest in terms of making sure that you are well rested and ready to go for test day. Okay, so that's just one way that you can prepare. Another thing that you should do the day before your exam, is to make sure that the evening before you eat a healthy meal for dinner, and that you like, so that means skip out on the sugar and different things like that. Like, make sure that you're actually giving your body good fuel to get you through the test the next day. Okay. A well balanced meal. And then you also want to spend like a little bit of the evening or the day, having fun, relaxing, getting your mind off the test. Those are really kind of key ideas for you to prepare you mentally and physically for the long exam. Okay, so you also want to be getting to bed a little bit early, like not super early necessarily, so that it throws off your schedule, your like sleeping schedule, but you do want to get to bed at least a little bit early. Plan ahead in terms of what your day is going to be like, so that you can do a little bit of review earlier on in the day, and then focus on relaxing, having fun, getting your mind off the test. But you also should be making sure that the night before you have all of your supplies ready to go. You have your ID if you need one for going to your testing center. You have a mask, you have your snacks and water, or whatever you're bringing, that you have all that, including like a graphing calculator if you're the calculator test, or whatever calculator you're using. You do need to be able to have that. And also, the College Board's website tells you which types of calculators, or they should. I believe they used to. I haven't checked this this spring, or I mean this fall, to confirm that. But in the past, they've kind of broken down what you're allowed to have in terms of a calculator and what you're not. But that information is also kind of broken down for you, I think, in the readings that I've had you do for the math sections. Just like the general information about the calculator section, and the non-calculator section. So again, just get your mind off the test the night before, get to bed a bit early, wake up with plenty of time to be able to get to the test, and have a good hearty breakfast in the morning. So one that is going to help, that's healthy, that's well balanced, that's going to fuel you through the day. And that you are able, like you have everything already from the night before ready to walk out the door, so you don't have to like scramble for things, and that you can go directly to the testing center with plenty of time to get there. So you can try to get there early. You don't have to be there super early necessarily, but you do want to give yourself plenty of time to get there, to get settled at the test center, to get like to acclimate yourself to the testing room that you're going to be in, and to make sure you've got all your supplies, all your materials ready to go. Your calculator is easily accessible, maybe beneath your chair, or And you have extra pencils that are within easy reach for you, and that you're following all the testing regulations, and that you know like where the bathroom is, where the water fountain is if you really need that, or you know where you've put your snack and your water, which will be in a separate room for you for during your breaks. And that's all been put together and set to go before you even leave before the morning of. Okay, so you have all of that ready to go, so you can really just focus on getting through the test, and then focus on getting through each section by section, each passage by passage, and question by question, so that you can always get to those questions to move on through the test, and you'll do fine. You'll do far better than had you not done that. Okay. All right. And then after you take the test, just a word to the wise: get your mind off the test, do something fun, relax, or go sleep if you're exhausted from the test, which you probably will be. But you do want to get your mind off the test, enjoy yourself, have fun, because you've put in all this effort and hard work towards achieving your goal. And you deserve to have a break before you start studying again for the next exam that you take, or for anything else that you do. Okay. So I've kind of given you a few more minutes than I intended about to look for questions, but no one as of yet has kind of told me that they have questions in the chat. So if you do not have any questions regarding the reading test that you want us to specifically look at, then I'm going to just kind of pick and choose some things. Okay, so if you haven't, from looking at your practice tests, because everyone should every week be self-scoring your practice tests, because that's in the homework. You should have self-scored practice test 3, because the answers are provided for you every week. Once you take a test. So, but that being said, we're just going to kind of look at some of my annotations then. So practice test 3. Who found this passage about Lady Carlotta to be tricky? Anyone? No? Remember to use your strategies. So underline, circle proper nouns and numbers. Okay, so you can see I did that. You can also do annotations in the margin. I wanted to show you specifically what it would look like without the annotations. And so you can kind of see that without the annotations, it's going to take me longer to be able to find the information in here than it would in, say, if I can pull it up for you. Give me just 1 minute. I have to find a different practice test that. Okay, so I want us to kind of take a quick look here. So you see practice test 3 that it doesn't really have. I did do the coding. Okay. I did process of elimination, of course. I did circling proper nouns and numbers. I did underlining, but I didn't do as much underlining as I normally do either. So normally I like underline far more than I expect you to. But you can kind of see, even in some of the other ones, I didn't do it quite the kind of annotation. I did some annotation here, but very, very minimal. Okay. And again, here I kind of noted who it was by, when it was, who the authors were for these texts. I did a little bit of kind of clarifying some ideas here, but that was really, really it. So compared to this, let's look at practice test 6 here. So these are my annotations for practice test 6, which you've seen from a previous class. So you can see I've done a lot more in terms of detail, kind of notes on the side. Did I do it through consistently? Yes, I did. So I have like an overarching idea up here. I have kind of key ideas here, kind of conclusions and different things like that. Here, again, kind of noting different sections of the text. Again, here, between the two different passages. So kind of contrasting like the overarching idea, law and order versus mob law and chaos. Who it's by, again. The same thing here, kind of key notes about them. And then do that here too. Lots of notes. So of these two, I've practiced my notes for practice test 6 and my notes for practice test 3. If I can find them. There we are. So for practice test 3, I did do a few, but if we even just look at the difference kind of between that practice test 6, which we were just looking at, and practice test 3, which was for this week, which one do you think is going to help me in terms of strategy find my answers more quickly? If you have any ideas, let me know in the chat. Are they both going to be equal in terms of helping me find answers, in terms of my level of annotation? I mean, they will ultimately both help me. I mean, it's better than not marking the text at all, right? But the kinds of annotations that I do matter. Okay, so let's see what 6 would probably be easier. So someone said 6. Did someone else think that 3 would be easier? With the, like, it might be less cluttered. Yeah, so I would agree. So this one student has said that you think 6 would probably be easier because you've evaluated the text more. I've evaluated the text more. So I've done more analysis, I've also kind of noted, especially for some of those kind of more technical passages, key ideas to help me keep track of the main ideas that are being talked about or things that I found to be important for the text. So making those kinds of annotations from practice test 6 in the margins, and that includes doing things like writing a key, like a main idea up at the top, like a central concept up at the top or at the very bottom of a particular passage, will help me be able to answer the questions more quickly, more efficiently, and more accurately. So because then I don't have to hunt as much for my information. So eliminating the time that I might waste trying to find an answer if I have to actually go through and reread everything because I can't remember where I found something. So that's why writing those kinds of keywords in the margins are really critical to helping you. And you don't have to do as much, maybe to the extent that I typically do. Like if we look back at practice test 3 or practice test 6, just kind of for comparison again. Should be practice test 6. That's practice test 6. Okay, so here's practice test 6 again. So you can kind of see how I've kind of made conclusions, and but this is also because of I'm used to doing more of a critical analysis of a text. I'm very text oriented, I guess you could say. So like you would in an English class. Okay, so or your history class or any other kind of science class or class where you are required to analyze the material you're looking at. That's the kind of thing that I was doing. So you don't necessarily have to do like full phrases. You can just do like a key word that will kind of clue you in. Like if you want it to focus on green, you could write green. Or you could, in the margin, you could say 1990s, a year that you want it to kind of look at. But remember too that the years you should be circling. Anytime you see a number or proper noun or name, you should be circling it. And then you should be underlining at the bare minimum your topic sentence, your concluding sentence, and any key words that you see in a particular passage. Okay, so obviously I underlined a lot for this particular passage in practice test 6, but I didn't do as much underlining in practice test 3, and that's because I wanted you to be able to see the difference between your approaches to doing annotation and how important annotation is in terms of helping you understand a text, especially when it's one that is very technical or dense, okay? Or uses a lot of, like, you're not sure what it's talking about. If you do come across a passage that you're really not sure what on earth it's talking about, try to do like the first reading just the first paragraph and the last paragraph, reading through just topic sentences and concluding sentences, and trying to do underlining here and there, things you might think are important, including doing your circling of proper nouns and numbers, and then get yourself to the get yourself to the questions. Okay, because the questions in that case are going to guide your breaking down and understanding of the passage. You don't want to get lost in a passage, which I know, especially early on, a lot of students were feeling lost in a particular passage because of the technical language that you see, or that because they thought that they needed to be an expert on this topic. The point of the reading test is to make sure you're a good reader, like that you can find information, critical information from a text, and be able to talk about it, to be able to answer questions. So because in college, you're going to be reading a lot of material each week. Okay, so you're going to be going through a lot more material than you typically do in high school. Okay, so you don't necessarily go through step by step with each text that you read, and you have to be able to glean information from a text and then be able to discuss it in class. So those are kinds of things that, and the same thing with research, is that you need to be able to understand the gist of a particular bit of research. And in that case, you need to do more of a close reading, but you do need to be aware that there are strategies you can apply to a text, even if you don't have the luxury of reading it word for word in detail for the entire thing. You can still get what the main idea is, what the key points are, and kind of information about that particular passage that you can then talk about, or determine if it is if this author's approach to this, whatever their topic is valid in terms of their practices as a researcher, as a scholar, regardless of what field that they're in. Okay, so what they're really asking you to do when you're looking at a reading test, or at the reading test passages, is to figure out what the central ideas are, what the big picture concepts are, which you can't do until you know what the details are. Okay. And that's why if you get stuck with a passage and you're not sure what on earth the main idea or the central concept is for the entire work, you want to move on to the questions as soon as you can so that you can let the questions guide you and go start from a detail level first and build your way up to those big picture questions. Okay. So that's really what you want to be able to do in terms of your approach to the reading test. If we look back at the practice test 3, which is what this one should be. Yes. Okay. So looking at practice test 3, does anyone have any questions about the reading strategies that we've talked about in class, or not understanding something, or is something not working really for you specifically? If so, please let me know. But what I would like everyone to be doing right now is to look at your answers and let me know if there are particular questions you want us to go over. Okay. Whether it's an inferencing type question or vocabulary and context, or just being able to identify a particular question type, we can discuss that for the next kind of few minutes, and then we'll kind of move on to the writing and language test. Okay. So I'm going to give you just another kind of 2 minutes to really look at any of your reading test questions, your answers, and let me know if there was a particular passage that was tricky for you that you wanted to discuss. And to let everyone know, when you're looking at practice test 3, my annotations, I did not annotate anything really other than the year and the author for the paired passage, the second passage for Mary Wollstonecraft. And that is because I have read the original work and I'm very familiar with this particular text because of my background. So I didn't need to do further annotations for myself because I already knew what the passage was about inside and out. I did do a little bit of annotations for passage 1, but again, this was also my intention for this practice test, was so you can see what it would look like if you're not doing as many annotations as you've seen me do in the past, and how that can possibly affect your answers. Okay. Anyone actually have a problem with the Mary Wollstonecraft, the Vindication on the Rights of Women passage? Because that's usually a tricky one. Not only because it's from 1792, but because it's a very dense piece, and it is tricky to understand if you're not sure what it is that she was actually achieving. Okay, so someone got confused a little bit on that passage. Okay, were there any other ones before we kind of delve into Mary Wollstonecraft? Or did the other ones make more sense in general? Because it was like from 2012. When was this one? 1911. Okay. So, I mean, that's still a little bit more antiquated language. Not as bad as 1792 for you. This one, 2012. So this is very recent. So that one is very tech heavy a little bit. But it's more relatable, I think, because in terms of as language for you to understand. Even if it is technically dense a little bit. And then this one was from 2011. So I think that this one also was something that you could more easily understand in terms of the general language of the passage. But the paired passage, both of them were from the 18th century. Okay, so that means the 1700s. Okay, so the late 1700s, kind of almost into the 19th century, so the 1800s. What did people think that these two passages were really kind of talking about? Or did you have any specific questions that didn't make sense to you, that you got wrong, that you want to talk about? And we can kind of start from there and then talk about the passage in the context of it. So the paired passage, this one relies kind of heavily on understanding what was going on at this time period. Okay, and also understanding what specifically their focus is. So with the first passage, it's adapted from Talleyrand et al., which is the report. The name of the title of the piece was Report on Public Instruction, and which was published in 1791 originally. And passage 2 was the one that was adapted by Mary Wollstonecraft's of Vindication of the Rights of Women, which was published in 1792. Okay, so Talleyrand was a French diplomat. The report was a plan for national education, and Wollstonecraft, a British novelist and political writer, wrote Vindication in response to Talleyrand. Also, it is important for you to kind of know that at this time, women were not really, it was kind of frowned upon for women to be writing. Or to be writers in general, in terms of society and what the expectations was, because a woman's place was considered in the home, and that there were a lot of social issues that were kind of going on, because there were different key differences between education of men and education of women. A woman didn't really receive an education in most cases, or if she did, if she was an upper class woman and had a father who was very open-minded and indulged her like education and educated her at least similarly to her brothers, not necessarily to the same level as her brothers, then she was very fortunate. And then she would likely turn into something like Mary Wollstonecraft, who was really kind of looking at this discussion by Talleyrand, because if we kind of like, I'm not going to read through it now, but kind of looking at what Talleyrand's particular passage is focused on. It's a report on public instruction, So that can be many things. So it's really, they're talking about like the acknowledgement and sanctioning of education, right? So I mean that this particular the first passage is really focused on um, kind of the differences between classes, the differences between genders, the differences kind of between expectations for different classes, different kinds of people in society, when and this kind of shift towards um, the idea that we like the different classes of people all deserve education, like this kind of shifting ideology that is depending on um, what it is that they're really kind of dealing with here. So I mean, thinking about kind of just in general really about Talleyrand is really talking about this kind of need for change, this kind of acknowledgement that, which is very gradual, and change doesn't happen overnight. It actually takes several more centuries for education to turn into what we know it as today, where men and women should be able to get an equal education depending on where they are. But I mean, it's a fight for it's talking about equality. It's talking about kind of public expectation, dealing with just how to be a better society. That's kind of what they're really focusing on, rather than as well as like women's place in society and what the expectations are. Like especially this paragraph is really looking at this one where it says, it seems to us uncontestable that our common happiness, above all that of women, requires that they never aspire to the exercise of political rights and functions. Here we must seek their interest in the wishes of nature. Is it not apparent that their delicate constitutions, their peaceful inclinations, and the many duties of motherhood set them apart from strenuous habits and onerous duties, and summon them to gentle occupations and the cares of the home? Okay, so what this is saying, you need to take this with a grain of salt, like understanding that your lens of society, like your viewpoint, you will probably have a lot of bias when reading this because you're coming from an older kind of, I mean, you're coming from the modern era, really. So you're used to having men and women be equal. That has not always been the case, or at least as equal as they can be, but or at least as society has progressed till now. But basically, you're talking about the differences that have been established, that were established earlier on in terms of the work for men and the work, like the work and place in society for men and versus the work and place in society for women. And so you need to kind of take that into to heart here and think about, okay, so both of these kind of these authors are really looking at how women are being like what the views on education are in general in their society, as well as the kind of their perspective on where a woman's place is. Okay, so whether or not it's in the home, whether or not it's as a writer, as an equal to men, which is really more what Mary Wollstonecraft is kind of trying or is alluding to. She's not saying it outright, because if she said it outright, she would be in a lot of trouble. Okay, so she's already going to be in trouble here. So women had to find a way to talk about these kinds of issues in society without putting themselves in a position where they would be maybe accused as a witch for their like ambitious views of society, or interfering in the affairs of men at this time, or that they could be she could be accused of being like disobedient to her husband, or like different things like that. There are a lot of social issues that underlie these two different passages, and that are kind of talking about the like women's acknowledgement that there needs to be change, like that we need to be able to have our voices heard, because the majority, actually, if you look at it from a historical perspective, I'm not going to go into this much more than this now, but this is just to give you a gist of this particular passage so we can move on to other things. But essentially what Mary Wollstonecraft is demonstrating here is that women know that there's this issue. They know that they're not considered equals of men. They're trying to fight for their equality, to obtain like for the right to be able to express their opinions on political matters, to have the right to work outside the home, to be able to work beyond just being a mother, or to being a daughter or a sister, to beyond the social expectation and obligations, because they're deemed as what was historically called the weaker sex, or referred to as the weaker sex for women, meaning that they are the weaker gender, that they're more delicate, they can't handle the same kinds of stress and work that men can do, like in terms of like which we now know today is ridiculous, but this time that was a commonly held belief for thousands of years, in a lot of different societies, not every society, because some societies were a little bit more matriarchal, but rather than patriarchal. But Mary Wollstonecraft lived in a patriarchal society, so women were kind of seen as subservient to men at that point, and it's kind of reflected here in that she's arguing that she's not expecting she's arguing for women's right to reason, because you have to think that this is also happening kind of at the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, in terms of historical development, and the kind of push for scientific reasoning, the kind of push for industrial, like the beginning of like the very beginning of industrial kind of change, as well as kind of moving, like the scientific revolution that was kind of starting to happen at this point, or had been ongoing at that point. So there's a lot happening that is demanding more reason. Like people are moving away from ideologies or that were not science based. So more scientific inquiry was happening and things like that. So she's saying, then wouldn't it be reasonable, like why can't women have access to, like women have the same capacity for reason that men do, and that she's kind of arguing against that. I mean, she's trying not to put herself in a compromised position in terms of what she's saying, but she is also trying to argue, like using reason to reason with men. Okay. So that's all I'm going to really say here is that she is arguing against this first perspective. So this first perspective is really kind of focused more on keeping women confined to the home, keeping them away from rational thought, like everything, like no access to education, different things like that. I mean, or minimal access and controlled access to education and things like that. So it's, this second passage is really fighting against that. And that's kind of what you want to take away from this. Okay. So, I mean, again, like looking at question 34, even it's saying, according to author passage 2, in order for society to progress, women must receive an education comparable to that of men. So that's really ultimately what she's calling for. And that's really what this argument is about. Whereas the previous author is saying, even though we are making progress with education and instruction, like towards reason and different things like that, with the first author, they're saying that it's still the place of women to stay at home. Whereas this Mary Wollstonecraft is calling for an education comparable to that of men for women. Okay. All right. Any other questions on the reading passage, or can we move on to, did that kind of clarify for those of you who found that particular passage confusing? Hopefully. Okay, so we're going to look at the writing and language test, and then we're going to, I want to see if you have any questions specifically. We're going to get to your questions first, and then we're going to kind of go through some more grammar type concepts for different things that you don't understand, or just picking up where we left off last week. And then we'll get to math. So let's see. So maybe in about 10 minutes, we'll take a quick 5-minute break after we kind of go through the questions from the practice test, and then we'll kind of reconvene and start grammar. And then maybe after grammar, we'll take another quick little break and then move on to the math. Okay. So anyone find the writing and language section still to be really tricky for you? I mean, aside from the lots of grammar concepts and lots of writing and editing things, I mean, the majority of the writing and language test, the concepts of the writing and language test should not be foreign to you. Even if you're not really sure like what parallel structure is, if you can identify whether or not this first one looks correct to you and sounds correct to you, that's really all you need. So the additional kind of content review that we're doing is talking about, in terms of talking about grammar and like writing concepts. If you don't remember what they technically mean, what these terms are, that's fine. It's more important for you to internalize and know and recognize when something is grammatically correct, which is something that as a native speaker of English, if you are one, you should be able to understand. You should be able to pick out that healthier, that this first choice is the better one based on the other options. So, I mean, like, even if you kind of read it aloud to yourself, where it says studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment in which temperatures are carefully controlled. So here, regardless of this second part, which also it is a bit awkward, okay, reading even just this much, studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive. Okay, so even if you just read that much, you should be able to tell that, yes, there needs to be a pause after happier. There needs to be a pause after healthier. And then before you have this conjunction, okay, before you have the and something, because you have comma, this is basically kind of commas in a series, in a way, parallel structure, where you have different, each of these are adjectives. So you have comparative adjectives, meaning that you have like the kinds of adjectives that you typically see with an ER type ending in English. So meaning that like the word better, instead of better versus best. Okay, so I mean, better would be the comparative form of the adjective. And then healthier is also a comparative form, as is productive in this case. Okay, so the more in this case, because we can't have productor. That just doesn't make sense in English if we had an ER. So in place of the ER ending, what we're technically doing is we have that more. So when we're talking about comparative adjectives, we're dealing with is something more or is it most? Okay. So more is comparative versus most, which isn't. Okay, which is something different, which is the next level beyond that. Okay, so studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive. So more productive. Each of these has parallel structure because you're introducing three different types of comparative adjectives, three different comparative adjectives here. So, and you have commas in this series here to introduce more than one item. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. Okay, that's just one example. But even if you didn't know that technically you're dealing with comparative adjectives or you're dealing with parallel structure, you could tell based on how this sounds. Okay, so you can go on your gut instinct. Does it sound right? Does it sound not right? Does it not make sense? Can I understand what it is that I'm trying to say? Is this the best choice that they're giving me of the choices that are there? That's kind of one key strategy you can use regardless of if you know the technical concepts. That being said, it's much better for you in the long run if you know these technical concepts so that you can use them when you're writing, and that you can identify them if you're editing someone else's work, and you can know how grammar works, and how language works, as well as how what you need to do or things that you need to think about when you're writing and editing a piece. Okay. So that ultimately when you're communicating ideas. Okay, so that you're trying to communicate ideas so that you can understand so someone else can understand what you're trying to say. Okay, so you're communicating ideas to an intended audience. Okay, so that you are, or an audience of some sort, and they are kind of receiving your message. Okay, so, but you also need to be able to identify, because you're acting as the reader here, you are actually acting as the receiver as well as the communicator. Okay, so that means that you need to be able to identify when there are errors and when there are not. And a lot of the errors that you see are things that you can figure out based on, does it sound right to me? Does it sound, or does it not? Okay. But knowledge of grammar concepts, knowledge of writing techniques and strategies are really helpful for this test, but they're not something that should be unfamiliar to you because you've been being trained as a writer, as a reader, and as an editor, kind of since you and researcher since you started school, or since you started learning language. Your knowledge of grammar has been growing. So yeah, so and of ideas and communicating ideas, it's all been there. It's just you might not know the technical terms. Okay, and that's okay. You just want to go with what seems the best solution for you, like of the choices that they give you. Okay, so question 2 here, which choice provides the most appropriate introduction to the passage? This requires knowing what you need in an introduction. So this shouldn't be something that is completely unknown to you. You should have be familiar with like essay structure, and what an introduction is, what it needs to contain, whether it's a hook, whether it's your thesis statement or analytical claim or argumentative claim or what have you, and supporting details, transition sentences, things like that. So looking here, they're saying which choice provides the most appropriate introduction. Choice B ends up being the right answer because it's saying basically, so question 2 is actually on the second page. Yeah, this one was a little bit confusing because they have a 0 here, which I think was a little bit of a confusing typo here. So, or they're identifying kind of the first section that they're really kind of looking at. So 2, I think, is really supposed to be here, in which temperatures are carefully controlled, because that's what these are kind of talking about. They're kind of talking about this first sentence, really. So an introduction to the passage. So that would be in the first paragraph. Okay, so that would be your introduction to everything as a whole, which should be this first paragraph for this question. Okay, so I think a lot of students get that confused because I don't know what the test makers were thinking in terms of putting a 0 here when it should most likely be a 2. And then they kind of throw their additional numbering off a little bit. So you just kind of have to follow what the actual underlying portions say in terms of which section to focus on here, which is a bit annoying actually. But here, so studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment that affords them adequate amounts of natural light. Okay, as opposed to in which temperatures are carefully controlled, which is the original here. Okay. Or that, I mean, it requires reading through the full paragraph, and it requires even reading a little bit beyond to find out what their first paragraph is going to be talking about, like here, where it says, for one thing, lack of exposure to natural light has a significant impact on employees' health. To know which direction they're going, like in terms of what they're introducing. Okay, so of these choices, we know that they're not really focused on, I mean, they're focused on employees. They're not focused on conserving money or energy loss, right? So that is thoroughly sealed to prevent energy loss. That's not what's affecting the employees, right? So you need to look at this first sentence and kind of the broader context of the rest of this paragraph. And on like the kind of what the next body paragraphs are really going to be talking about, so that you can figure out what it is that you need to, how to answer. So you can really eliminate C, and then you can also really, we don't really get much evidence of D. So in which they feel comfortable asking managers for special accommodations. That's not what this is talking about. We're not talking about special accommodations. We're specifically talking about light in the workplace, like lighting, and it's not necessarily in which temperatures are carefully controlled, although I'm sure that's a contributing factor. Like if it's too cold for you to be able to work, that can be challenging, or if it's too hot and you can't focus, you get really like unfocused, just like you can in school. or in another environment. That's not what the focus is. The focus here is on adequate amounts of natural light. So the benefits of natural light. Okay, so showing, which you can learn from this first section here. Okay, where it's talking about lack of exposure to natural light has a significant impact on employees' health. Okay, so that's kind of where you're going with this. So you want to make sure that you're finding the right sentence to help introduce that idea and lead the reader to that conclusion for this, to set them up to understand where you're going. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so I did say we were going to take a quick 5-minute break, but we might do that in 5 minutes because I do want to kind of look at some of these other examples, and then we'll kind of do that. Okay, and then we'll switch gears and look at some grammar and then move on to math. Okay, so looking at some of the rest of these passages, you have things about logic, flow, reasoning, cohesion, accuracy, noting like relationships between ideas and explaining the terms, like asking you to make an editorial choice, talking about possessive construction, understanding that you need a singular noun and a correct plural construction. As well as singular verbs agreeing with singular noun. So subject verb agreement, flow, logic, reason, dealing with direct reference to productivity. So like basically the idea introduced in the previous sentence, dealing with identifying kind of elements of an essay and of an article. So supporting details, things like that. Dealing with appropriate transitions, logic, flow, cohesion, clarity, redundancy. So identifying that something is basically being redundant, versus what's appropriate, precision of language, transitional adverbs, relative pronouns corresponding with plural and referent, and verb to introduce definitives. And then we have preposition usage and idiomatic expression to connect to nouns, to noun or verb. I think a lot of these are relatively straightforward. Did anyone have specific questions or numbers from the writing and language test for practice test 3 that you want to go over? Because I mean, if not, you all will have a copy of my annotations to review. Now dealing with tone, consistency of tone, dealing with diction, comma usage, modifying clauses, precision of language, concision of language, dealing with kind of pronoun usage, logic, reasoning, etc. Dependent clauses, punctuation. Yeah, really, I mean, it's all like adjective use. This is all, a lot of these are really kind of common sense grammar kind of concepts that you can identify in reading, just like we did that first one, and trying to figure out, does it make sense? You can, like here, this one is more of knowing your knowledge of vocabulary. So it's more of a vocabulary and context type question, but it's because it's focused on diction, and your understanding of precise language, and that you're kind of how to use adjectives, and how that these are all adjectives. So meaning they're descriptive words, or that you can be used to describe or modify a noun or pronoun, and knowing how they're used. Present tense verbs, colon usage, so more punctuation, dealing with comma, like identifying comma splices, logical transitions. Yeah, organization, accuracy, precision, evidence, support, analysis. If you don't have any specific questions, then what we're going to do right now, M- usage, dependent clause, plural verb with plural noun, present tense, introduce the subject next paragraph, organization, parallelism. Nothing too surprising in here. I mean, this is all stuff, like a lot of it is ideas centered, which shouldn't be surprising. We're dealing with organization, kind of editorial decisions that you need to make, and understanding paragraph and essay structure, as well as understanding sentence structure and organization, and how different types of words fit together. So these are all, and how to kind of punctuate sentences and things like that. So if you don't have any specific questions about this section, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And then what I'm going to have you do is we're going to discuss some additional grammar concepts, just kind of doing a quick little crash course of grammar again. And then we will move on to math. Okay, so everyone has 5 minutes. We should be back here about 10:26. It's 10:21 now. So you can have a snack break, or do whatever you need to do. And then we'll be back here at 10:26. Okay, so thanks everyone. Okay, so everyone should be back now from a quick little break. We're going to kind of change gear, well, stay with the writing and language test for the moment, and then we're going to switch gears to math. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at just our grammar concepts, if I can find them here. Okay, so again, I do highly encourage everyone to really look up the grammar terms if you don't understand what they mean. And I gave you plenty of free resources that are available online, but I do recommend there is like this SAT resource for specifically grammar resource for SAT and ACT prep. Okay, so this book by Christian Heath, which is one that we've kind of been working through a little bit, is one that I do highly recommend for you in terms of giving you a quick grammar refresher for what you actually like, for the things that are most frequently tested on the SAT or ACT in terms of grammar. Okay, to help you kind of review those key concepts, look at specific types of questions and how they may be formatted. Although depending on which test you're taking, it will vary. So what I want us to kind of look at, I know last time we've talked about subject verb agreement. We've started kind of going through verb tense and form. So let's kind of pick up there for now. Does anyone have questions specifically on verb tense and form, or can we kind of just look at those? I mean, again, this is very basic grammar, but it's sort of essential grammar. If you don't know what tense is and how forms change, the form of the verb changes depending on what tense you're using, or how, in terms of whether or not you are talking from the first person point of view, the second person, the third person point of view, and whether it's singular or plural. So in terms of your subject, so all of that affects what form the verb appears in. But I think that this should be very straightforward for all of you, because if not, I don't think you would have gotten through your English classes till this point, if you were not sure which tense to be using. Okay, so here again, just to kind of reiterate, English, the most common types of forms of tense in English are the past tense, the present tense, and the future tense. Okay, there are varied forms depending on, like, different kinds within those categories, but those are the general categories. Okay, And if you have learned other languages like French or Latin or Spanish or German or any language really, you'll find out that there are many different types of tenses, and not all of them are, English doesn't necessarily have all of them, okay? Or there might not be an equivalent form in another language for a particular tense. So you have to think about what you know of tense, what you know that it does, and kind of think about the general, you're just thinking about it in general. You're not necessarily identifying what is this tense, but you have to be able to identify how to use it in context. Okay, so you should be able to know how to use it, as opposed to what the technical term for that tense is. It's beneficial to know the technical term, so you can distinguish between the other forms that are there, and it just kind of increases your depth of knowledge about grammar and how to use it and how to manipulate and use language to express yourself, and communicate. But it isn't an absolute requirement for this test. You do need to be familiar with what being able to determine if something is grammatical or not. That's kind of what it boils down to, just like we were talking about before. So these are some examples, like I run is present tense, I ran past tense, I will run future tense. So this is very, very basic. This is, we have other forms like passive forms versus active forms of verbs as well. And we have different types of verbs that we're dealing with that might appear in different forms. Okay, so if you're unsure about these, definitely go to a grammar resource and look them up. I don't want to spend that much time on here because there's so much grammar that we should really kind of look through. And I still want to be able to get to math today. Okay, so also kind of knowing, like, one of the key things, so you might be asked a question about tense, which we've seen before, and you might be asked about something called parallelism. Okay, so making the correct choice of verb, tense, and form is often linked to the rule of parallelism. Okay, so what we can actually kind of do, I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit in our grammar, if I can get to our table of contents. So lesson 10. So what parallelism is, I mean, you maybe didn't even really know that it's a concept in grammar. You might have heard about it in math, but it's a different concept in grammar. Okay, so basically in math, it applies to kind of lines that are going exactly the same direction as one another. They're in perfect alignment, basically. Grammar has parallel situations, just like math, and the concept is kind of similar, okay? But it's not anything to do with math, okay? So when we're talking about parallelism in grammar, we're talking about parallel structure. We're talking about situations where you might have lists, or you might be making comparisons of two or more things. You can really, they're going in the same direction. They're following, kind of, they're mirroring each other in a way, in terms of the, like, just like that example that we had with, where is it? Okay. Just kind of quickly to make a quick connection here to what we were really looking at. So remember this first question we looked at, it's demonstrating parallel structure. And that means because we're dealing with comparative adjectives. So we're dealing with the words healthier, happier, and more productive, which are in a comparative form of an adjective. So they're, each of them are the same type of adjective form, okay? Meaning that they are, they're in the same form. So they're parallel. Each of these you shouldn't have happier, happiest, and happy in terms in here. You would need to have happier, or I mean, you couldn't have, just to give you extent, like you couldn't use the two different forms of the adjectives. So, I mean, you could use happy as an adjective. You could also use it as happier or happiest. Okay, so happier is the comparative form. Okay, so that means that it is like the equivalent of better. Okay, so if something is better than something else, that's what we're dealing with here. So we kind of talked about this earlier, but you need each of these adjectives that are matching. They need to be in the same form. That's what they mean by parallel structure, especially because they're basically set off in a series. So you have a series of adjectives that are kind of setting up for like a list, basically. Like you can kind of think of this, they're listing adjectives here. So they're basically using a series. So we're using commas in a series, right? With the comma followed by the conjunction, right? And then we are, in terms of punctuation, but we are also using adjectives. We're using comparative adjectives here. So each of these adjectives needs to be in its corresponding comparative form. Okay, so you can't just have the plain adjective by itself or the superlative adjective form, which is the best form. Okay, which is like the ultimate form. Okay, so like you can't like we couldn't say happiest, healthy, more productive. Okay, so we couldn't do different forms. Okay, so that's kind of what this boils down to. And this is true for it's not just with adjectives, it could be with anything. But that just kind of gives you a real world example from the SAT. Okay, so what parallelism and comparisons are kind of dealing with is that you have three main situations that will happen when you're dealing with parallelism. Okay, you can have in a simple list, like a grocery list. So in a grocery list, you're listing nouns, right? You're listing nouns of things that you need to pick up. So all of those are following the same, they're in the same category, grammatical category. Okay. You can also have a situation with parallelism where you have between two or more longer phrases. So that generally happens when you're dealing with something like verbs, like you have longer phrases, or you might have a noun, you might have different kind of situations. We'll get into specific examples, but also the third option, the way that you'll see parallelism happen is within a comparison, like the one that we were just talking about with comparative adjectives. Okay. So the first one is the simplest to kind of understand. Okay, so it's a list basically. Okay, so you have, I went to the store for eggs, milk, and cheese. Eggs, milk, and cheese are the items on my list. Okay, so the list doesn't actually have to be a grocery list where you have bullet points basically, or you say, this is what we need. This is literally a list of what we need, but it can be a list like this where you're listing it using commas in a series. Okay. But it's one of kind of the easiest examples to kind of remember. Like a non-grocery list could possibly be, I like running, jumping, and swimming. Okay, so you're listing the things that you like. Again, you're using commas in a series to help you introduce and say that these are the things that I like to do, right? So these are kind of listing what I like to do or not. So if you have three items in a grocery list, all of which are nouns, so that's what they're falling into the same category. So for I went to the store for eggs, milk, and cheese, eggs, milk, and cheese are all nouns. Okay, so nouns are a word that are describing a person, place, thing, or idea. And so just like with our comparative adjectives, they're all nouns that are in the series. Okay. You're not going to have nouns, adjectives, and adverbs all together necessarily either. Okay. So it has to have parallel structure. Okay. So they have to be the same type of thing that you're listing, basically. Okay. So basically, the list in this case is following proper parallel structure because all three items in the list are the same, are from the same part, are the same part of speech, basically. When we're kind of dealing with a math, like and kind of give you a comparison from math, is that the three nouns would be like three lines that all go the same direction. Okay, so visually, they're all going the same direction. I mean, I guess, okay, sorry, this is completely unrelated, but it just kind of gives you a visual of two lines going in the same direction. Okay, so this is Old Irish, don't worry about it. And these are like linguistic trees, but you don't really need to know this. Just focus on the line going down in order. Okay, so that's what it's basically doing. In like you have three lines that are parallel to each other. So that wasn't necessarily showing parallelism, but it was showing that you have a series of different lines together. Okay. So it would look something like, I'm doing this freehand, so they're not going to exactly be straight, but this would be like the three lines that are parallel. Okay. So this is kind of to give you an idea of what it should look like. So that means if you have nouns, you have or you could have noun, noun, and noun. Okay. I mean, I'm not giving you an actual noun here. I'm just kind of showing you. You could do that with verbs. So like a verb form, you could do it with adjectives like we saw, or any of the parts of speech. And that's in a list. Okay. So that's kind of showing you like the grocery list up here versus a grocery list that's not necessarily, or a list that's not necessarily in a linear form. Okay. Like a vertical line form. Here it is, anyway, that's kind of just the gist here. So going back to our kind of grammar discussion here. Parallelism, like a common parallel is a mistake that you're going to be tested on, and you'll see is something like, I went to the store for eggs, milk, and to buy cheese. You don't need the to buy portion because it's already implied with I went to the store, right? For I went to the store. So it's assumed that you're buying cheese, right? You're buying that in addition to the milk, eggs and milk, right? So having the extraneous kind of infinitive here of this verb to buy is a parallelism error. Okay, so because it's not something that falls into the category of noun, right? Which is what you need in this series. Okay, does that make sense? So all light items in a list of two or more things must be from the same part of speech and in the same form. So that's why it was important for us to have adjectives in our example from practice test 3 that were all in the comparative form of the adjective for the list that they were in. okay, in order for us to have parallel structure, okay? Some kind of, I'm not going to belabor this one. I think this one is pretty easy to understand, that there are bad examples. Like, I went to the store for eggs, milk, and buying cheese, or I went to the store for eggs to buy milk and bought cheese. Like, all of those are kind of violating the whole parallelism thing. And I think you can understand that when you're just reading through it and say, that doesn't make sense. Or at least I hope you do. So you want to make sure that you are following some of these good examples. Like, I went to the store for eggs, milk, and cheese, where you have 3 different nouns. I went to the store to buy eggs, to find milk, and to sample cheese, where you have all items are following the same pattern, where you have an infinitive form of a verb, meaning the to form of a verb, like to be or to do or to go, as opposed to the one of the defined forms of, or declined forms of a verb, where you are doing like an example would be I went, right? That is a that's not the that's not the infinitive form that you would need. So basically you want everything to match. So if you're setting up and you're including, like, I went to buy eggs, you need to have, and you can't just say to buy eggs, milk, and cheese. You would need to say to buy eggs, to find milk, and to sample cheese. Okay, so that makes, or you can just say I went to the store for eggs, milk, and cheese. Okay, so these are kind of examples of that. The other kind of situation is where you can fall into like the category of having flaws with sentence structure. So if you're dealing with like a sentence fragment, that can also happen with this. So if you are simply just kind of listing a fewer strings, longer neck, can produce lower notes, can produce as a verb form. So it's not going to fit. Okay, so it's not paralleling the nouns. It's not matching. So therefore we can't use it in parallel structure. And that was from an example that they gave. But parallelism, another form of parallelism that you can see in longer phrases, of a common mistake, is really when we have a list that's made up of larger phrases rather than individual words or small groups of words. Okay, so in this case, when we're using parallelism in longer phrases, we usually only have 2 items in the list. Okay, so an example of this type of mistake is, would you prefer to be eaten by an alligator or getting digested by a shark? Okay, well, reading that out loud, you should immediately pick up on that something's not right, because it doesn't sound right in the second half. So the list in the sentence is only 2 items long. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to have commas in the series for this one. Okay, so it's not appropriate. But you have the first thing that's in the list portion of this is really to be eaten by an alligator. And then the second is getting digested by a shark. You can tell immediately that they do not match, because one has an infinitive form of a verb with a past participle. And then the other does not. Okay, so you need to make sure that your forms match. And I'm sorry, I have hiccups right now. I think probably a little excited because we're talking about grammar. It's probably why I have the hiccups. So anyway, so parallelism here. To be eaten and to be digested would be the appropriate form. or getting eaten and getting digested. Getting eaten and getting digested is imprecise. So even if it's a technically valid form for grammaticality, it would be stronger writing to use the be eaten and to be digested than the getting eaten and getting digested form. Okay. So we can't mix and match these. You have to make sure it is matching. Basically, it's paralleling with what your items are that are being discussed. Okay. The biggest kind of giveaway for this type of mistake is looking for conjunctions like and, or, and phrases like not only, but also. When you're listing or comparing the items, you're listing or comparing the items that you list or compare should be the same parts of speech in the same forms. Very much the same kind of example here. I don't think we need to really go over this anymore. Another kind of concept would be using semicolons in a list. Okay, so this also ties into parallel structure. I need eggs, milk, and chicken. Or I visited Austin, Texas, Buffalo, New York, and Los Angeles, California. So usually when we're using just a basic list, we just use commas in a series. Okay, so we use commas to end a conjunction, like a conjunction like and, which is a connecting word, to indicate the items in our list. But sometimes we have to use semicolons instead. And that is making something like when we're making a list that's more complex, such as in the second example where it says, I visited Austin, Texas, Buffalo, New York, and Los Angeles, California. So we can use semicolons to kind of punctuate complex lists, especially if the items in the list already have commas within them. So do you see that there are commas here? After Austin, so between the city and the state. And then there's Buffalo, New York, Buffalo being a city, New York being a state, Los Angeles, same thing, city, state. So in that case, it makes it easier for us to basically separate the items in this complex list by using a semicolon. So Austin, Texas is one term. Buffalo, New York is the second, and Los Angeles, California is the third. So the semicolon is acting as a stronger bit of punctuation than just another comma. So instead of just, because we're separating, we're dealing with a more complex terms that need a little bit more clarity, okay, than just simply listing items in a list, okay? Because we have different types of nouns. We have a city, like a proper noun for a city, and we have a proper noun for a state, which are two different types of nouns. Okay, so that's also why you need the semicolon in this case to separate a list. The third instance with parallelism really kind of focuses on any sort of comparison that's made between two or more items. And those items must be logically comparable and follow the rule of parallelism. So this means some items that can be properly compared are things like cats versus dogs. They're both animals, so they can both be compared. Apples versus oranges, they're both fruit. Firemen and policemen, those are both professions or types of people. And then speed of a car versus speed of a motorcycle, they're both vehicles. The items that are nouns here are both vehicles, and you're dealing with speed for both of them. Okay, so you're going to be dealing in the same kind of realm for both of them. Okay, so the car and the motorcycle are the more important part of this comparison. Okay, because what you're actually comparing is the speed of each of these, but each of them are automobiles of some sort, so they fall into the same general category. Okay, and therefore can be compared. You also have, I mean, like for some that you can't compare, you have like cat hair versus dogs. You can't really compare cat hair or hair to an animal, to dog. Okay, it's not a logical comparison. So you want to change cat hair to versus dog hair. Okay, so you want to focus on, you want the objects to match. Okay, so what it is that you're comparing needs to match. Okay. Again, apples versus orange trees. In this case, one is the fruit, the other is the tree it grows on, and not the fruit. Okay, so you need to, or firemen's salaries versus policemen. One is money, the other is a person or profession. So you need the items that you're comparing to match. Okay, so that you can talk about them. A car versus the speed of a motorcycle. One's the vehicle, the other is velocity. So they're the speed at which they travel. Okay. So I think these are relatively logical, relatively straightforward. I don't really think we need to belabor this much more, but this is kind of a concept that a lot of students don't really know, or know what it's called. They know how to do this, but they're not really sure what it's technically called. And there's a lot of use of parallel structure on the exam. So that's one reason that we're really kind of trying to go through some of that. So if we kind of take one quick look at a bad comparison, or an example of a parallelism problem, you have, I like to run more than jumping. Doesn't make sense. You can hear it when you read it, or even like if you read it to yourself, it doesn't make sense. You understand what they're trying to say, but grammatically it doesn't make sense in the language. So therefore, it's ungrammatical, and you need, or like it's understandable, but it's not the best way to communicate those ideas. It's not the right form. Okay, so what you would want to do is kind of replace the forms. I like to run more than to jump, or like I like running more than jumping would make the most sense in this case. Another kind of tricky comparison variation is this example where they have, the length of this train is more impressive than any bus I've ever seen. It might sound right, but it's actually incorrect. So the length of this train is one thing that's being compared, and that's being compared to any bus. So it's illogical to compare a length to a vehicle. Okay, so you can fix that by saying the length of this train is more impressive than the length of any bus. That would make sense. Okay. So if you kind of train yourself to notice this type of error, you want to watch out for any kind of comparing words. So that can be ranging from more, bigger, wiser, louder, etc. Okay. The single biggest kind of giveaway for parallelism comparison errors might be under your nose is the word than. So that basically, that a word that always indicates some kind of comparison is going on. So basically, you want to kind of take away that you have different forms of parallelism, but ultimately all of them are making some kind of comparison or generating a list of some sort. Okay. And that you need to make sure that your forms match, that your parts of speech match, and that it makes sense. So just kind of go with your gut instinct on that. Let me see if there was anything else specifically that I wanted to look at. I think pronoun case, conjunctions, transitions, everyone really should be familiar with. Punctuation, I think you should be familiar with. Sentence structure. That one might be a little bit tricky. Adjectives and adverbs, I think you should understand those. Pronoun antecedent clarity might be another thing that we kind of want to look at. So kind of just to introduce you to this sort of topic, is that you are, there's a special term here, which is antecedent, okay, which for any noun that's replaced by a pronoun, okay? So in the example that they're kind of giving you here, like your level of pronoun mastery is really going to be responsible for a lot of points on your SAT or ACT. They test pronouns, especially pronoun antecedent clarity type rules, a lot. So you're going to want to know this type of grammar concept. So basically, pronouns are words that can take the place of a noun in a sentence. The form of the pronoun or the type of pronoun it is that you're dealing with varies depending on the situation. So if we have things like subject pronouns, object pronouns, possessive pronouns, which are technically possessive adjectives, not really pronouns, but they're describing, because they're describing ownership of something for someone else, that something belongs to someone. And they're actually acting as an adjective more than they are as a pronoun. But we also have like relative pronouns. We have all different kinds of pronouns. So you need to familiarize yourself with pronouns, the different categories of pronouns. But ultimately knowing that any pronoun is taking the place of a noun in a sentence. Okay. And depending on the position of that noun or the function of that noun in a sentence will dictate which type of pronoun you're using or which circumstances you're using particular pronouns. Okay. So one kind of thing I do want to point out here is that an antecedent here is just a fancy way to say that it's the noun, it's what we call the noun that's being replaced by a pronoun. Okay. So that's all it's really referring to. It's kind of helping you connect from what the pronoun is to the object or the item that it's replacing, that it's referring to. Okay. So it's not necessarily in that sentence. It could have been mentioned earlier on in a passage. So sometimes you have to hunt for it to know exactly what is being talked about. So if we kind of look at the sentence, a kind of example here, they give, my dog is running around. She is very excited. The specific noun dog is being replaced by the generic pronoun she. Okay, so which is a subject pronoun. Okay, because it's a word that can take a pronoun that can take the place of a noun acting as the subject of the sentence. Okay, so here, she has the antecedent dog. Okay, so that means that dog is the word that's being replaced by she. Okay, so it's what the pronoun is referring back to. Okay, you always want to pay special attention to the word antecedent. Okay, because you need to understand that term before you can really understand how to use pronouns and why we use them. So if you know what a pronoun is, which is a word that can take the place of a noun in a sentence, and you know what an antecedent is, the other thing that you need to know is why using pronouns without clear antecedents is confusing. Okay, so this ties into writing as well and communication, because if your audience doesn't know to what you're talking about in terms of the topic, because that's part of what a subject pronoun does, or a antecedent. The antecedent does is it clarifies specifically what's being talked about. Okay, and if you don't know what specifically is being talked about, it's hard to follow what the person is saying. So that's kind of why this is such an important area, is because it involves clarity of language. It also involves understanding and communicating ideas effectively. Okay, so this rule is in general pretty easy. It just means that you have to have a clear and definite antecedent to match with each and every pronoun that we encounter on the SAT and ACT test. Okay. there will be a clear antecedent in the text somewhere. You have to find it in a lot of cases in order for you to do that. That's different than if you were to write your own essay or to do anything else. If you're like in a conversation with someone, you might come in at a certain point and miss what is being said and have to catch up and have somebody clarify for you so that you can catch up and know what it is that they were actually referring to, what the antecedent ultimately was. Okay, so it's a little bit different because the answer will be there for you in the text. You just have to find it. Okay, so that makes your job a little bit easier because you know that the answer is there in the text. You just have to find the right answer, the right antecedent, okay, for that particular pronoun that you're talking about to correct this type of error, okay? So one thing that you can do, like if we have this kind of example, between cats and dogs, James likes them better. We kind of have a problem because them does not have a clear antecedent. Are we referring to cats or dogs as the animal James prefers? This is just kind of an example of pronoun antecedent clarity being broken. Okay, so that means that what we kind of really need to do is by adding details and non-essential parenthetical clauses, which just means adding additional kind of information to help us clarify what's going on in the sentence using and offsetting them with commas. What they do, the test makers often do, is they'll insert these non-essential parenthetical clauses to distract you from the actual antecedent and the pronoun of what it's supposed to be referring back to. So it's your job to decide to make sure that you're noting anytime that there is information in a sentence that you can remove without changing the meaning of the sentence, okay? Because being able to identify those really quickly will help you then focus on what is essential in this information for me in this particular sentence. So what is the antecedent to which this pronoun is referring? Does that make sense to everyone? Did anyone have a question on that? So we kind of look at an example here for pronoun antecedent clarity. Cyclone Althea devastated portions of northern Australia in December 1971. The strong winds ripped roofs off houses, hail damaged vehicles and windows, and it cost the Australian federal government close to $1 billion in modern day adjusted values. Okay, so these are our choices here. So it's either no change and they cost, and those cost, and the storm cost. So if we notice here, the pronoun it in the underlined portion, so and it cost, that's the part that we're looking at in isolation to try to change, okay, within the context of this sentence. It's a complex sentence. I mean, like a compound sentence, because we have a complete independent clause up at the top here, separated by a semicolon, okay? And then we have a second independent clause that is very long that we're focused on. So they are inserting the strong winds ripped roofs off houses, hail damaged vehicles and windows, and blank, the Australian federal government close to $1 billion in modern day adjusted values. So we have a list going on, okay? Just kind of like our discussion of parallel structure. Here, the it and the other pronouns throughout the answer choices are they and those. So choice D kind of replaces the pronoun with a specific noun, the storm. Could there be a reason for that? That's something we want to think about that. And there certainly is, of course, the three pronoun choices that we have. So let's look for them. So we have it, we have they or those as possible choices. We don't really have anything in here that is other than it that is a pronoun here. Okay. So we can kind of look at those choices that we have and find that they all kind of share the same problem. So none of them have a clear and definite antecedent. We don't know if it refers to the cyclone or to the winds and the hail. What for they and those, all three pronoun choices, these choices have the same issue. The antecedent to the pronoun is not clear enough. So that means that the answer choice that we're really looking for and the storm cost makes the most sense in this context. So therefore, D has to be the correct answer because it sidesteps the problem entirely with pronoun antecedent clarity by not using any pronoun at all and replacing instead a specific noun, storm. Okay, so storm is being inserted here, and the storm cost the Australian federal government close to $1 billion in modern day adjusted value. So it's not only clarifying what is happening, it's still containing that verb that we need. Okay, so we still have kind of clarifying what's being done, but we're focused more on the specific noun in here rather than an ambiguous pronoun. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So that's kind of one. So basically, like just a quick reference here for antecedent clarity with pronouns. A pronoun is basically what they're calling an anonymous noun, but I think a better description is that it's a word that can take the place of a noun in a sentence. It's not a noun, it's a pronoun. So it's a word specifically that can take the place of a noun in a sentence. It doesn't necessarily, you can think of it like specific nouns versus an anonymous noun if that works for you. But I think it makes the most sense in terms of the function of the pronoun and what it does as a category as a whole for the 8 parts of speech, that it really takes the place of a noun in a sentence. Okay, so, and the form reflects the function of that noun in a sentence. Okay. The antecedent is referring to a specific noun. So it's the noun in particular that is replaced by the pronoun that refers back to, so the pronoun refers back to that noun. Okay. Every pronoun has to have a specific and clear antecedent. That's very true. If the antecedent of a pronoun is ever unclear, then the rule is being broken. If you're not sure what the antecedent is, chances are the rule is being broken. Or if you're not sure what they're talking about, chances are the rule is being broken. Okay. So you want to kind of anticipate these when you look through the test. So you want to look for pronoun questions. You always want to double check anytime you see pronouns to make sure that this isn't going to be a pronoun antecedent clarity question. Okay. And if it is, then you know exactly what you need to look for an antecedent and make sure it's clear in terms of your answer choices. Okay. Of what's being talked about. Okay. So I'm not going to really go into that much more. We'll kind of want to shift to math, but there are other things other rules that apply to pronoun and antecedent, pronoun and antecedent relationships, basically. So you have, in addition to clarity, you have agreement. So whether something is singular and plural. So basically what that boils down to is whether or not they match. So you want to kind of look at the breakdown is that it's related to the subject verb agreement type questions that we have. Okay, so you always want to make sure that the pronoun and the antecedent that it's replacing match in terms of their number. So in terms of whether something is singular or whether it's plural. And I mean, there's a huge number of questions that you see on the test related to this particular concept. So anything with pronoun antecedents are typically big questions on the test, or common questions on and frequent questions on the test. So you basically want to kind of treat any pronoun question like with skepticism before you you want to look at it critically anytime you see pronouns, because chances are they're going to be asking you some kind of pronoun related question. Not always the case, but sometimes it might just be focused on the subject verb agreement, but sometimes it might be focused on parallelism. Other times it might be on another concept entirely. But chances are you always want to rule it out as a possibility. Okay, so if it is unclear exactly what antecedent and pronoun is replacing in the sentence, it's already wrong. That's one kind of good thing about these types of questions, is that if you're not sure what the antecedent is or what it's replacing, chances are there's already an error going on, and you have to figure out how to fix it. Okay. So pronouns must match the antecedent noun they replace, in whether they're singular or plural. And pronouns acting as subjects must also match their verbs in whether or not they're singular or plural. So that means that the pronouns have to agree with the verb that's the verb that they're attached to. Okay, pretty logical. And we've talked about subject verb agreement before. Some pronouns are obviously, or like many pronouns are obviously singular or plural, but some are trickier. There are trickier ones that they kind of go into, like kind of the presence of one, like anyone, no one, someone, is an indicator that the pronoun is singular. And then we also have special cases like with neither and either, or neither, neither, either, are special pronouns because they follow the second noun singular plural number. Okay, so kind of just looking here, tricky pronouns would be things like one. I mean, this would be an easier one to figure out, would be something like that has one in it. Those, all, many, few, you can figure out that they're either singular, like one is singular, those is plural, all the other ones were plural. Some harder ones to kind of figure out from that would be something like no one, neither, either, anyone, everyone, someone, every, each. Just like when we were talking about subject verb agreement, you have to think about our kind of collective nouns in terms of like everyone is talking about a group of people, or you're talking about like no one is also referring to a group of people. Every, like making those kinds of distinctions, you have to really think about if you're dealing with a collective group, or if you're dealing that's being treated as one group, like one group, or if you're dealing with several groups. Okay, that would be the difference between the singular and the plural. Okay, and then these ones are really tricky with neither and either. So basically you want to remember that neither the cat nor the dogs is plural. Neither the dogs nor the cat is singular. Okay, because neither and neither nor can be singular or plural depending on the situation. So it depends. They will actually follow the second noun when determining the singular or plural nature. So in neither the dogs nor the cat is the second noun in that construction. So cat, so therefore your verb has to match as singular. Okay, whereas the or your pronoun that has to match is singular here. Okay, so yeah, I mean, like, and either really follows the same rules as neither. Okay, so neither could be plural, neither the cat nor the dogs. You're ending with dogs as plural, so therefore you're dealing with a plural. Neither the dogs nor the cat is singular. Okay, so I think that's pretty relatively straightforward, but they follow the second noun singular plural number. Okay. Is there anything else I want to pronoun case? We're not going to worry about that for now. So generally just trying to trust your ear. Okay. We're going to switch gears. Actually, we'll take a quick 5-minute break again. And we're going to tackle math. Okay. Because I want to spend a few minutes going through math. One thing I wanted us to look at. Okay, so everyone can reconvene at 11:25. So we're kind of done with the reading test and writing and language test for today. We're going to switch gears and talk about math. So make sure you get your math questions up, get a little stretch break if you need it, or get some water or anything like that, or have your snack if you didn't have it earlier. And we can kind of resume with our math test in about 5 minutes. Okay. As everyone's returning, you can kind of just pull out your math work and kind of look through your incorrect answers and see if there are any ones that you wanted specifically to talk about. And we can kind of go from there. We're going to start in just like another minute. Okay. Okay. So if you're just getting back now, please make sure you bring out your incorrect answers from your practice test for practice test 3 and look at the math section 3, the non-calculator math section, as well as the calculator portion. That's fine. You can look at that too. And just kind of let me know if there are specific ones you didn't understand how to solve, based on like going through the math videos or different things like that that you were kind of confused on for this week, as well as just problems you want to talk about, and we can kind of go from there. And if not, then we're going to kind of talk about general math concepts that you need to kind of review. Okay, so people can let me know in the chat. I'll give you like another minute to kind of look through your notes. Okay, does anyone have any questions from the math problems that you wanted to look at as a class, or that you didn't understand, or anything that you want to go over? All right, so if no one has any questions, then I'm going to think that you know what you're talking about, and that you're comfortable with the math questions for both sections and how to kind of approach these, and then it's just a matter of practicing your strategies, which is fine at this point. I mean, we've been working for a while, and I think that these are really kind of concepts that you've been working on a lot in school, if not recently, through maybe like middle school type level work that you've been doing in terms of concepts with algebra, in terms of understanding like geometry concepts, like basic geometry concepts, understanding kind of properties of numbers, properties of dealing with like integers and real numbers, and dealing with like radicals and all of that, and order of operations and all of that. If you're comfortable doing that, that's great. So one of your main strategies that you can use with the math test, which I've talked about before, is process of elimination. Okay, but you can also you can use that to help you eliminate incorrect answers, or things that you definitely don't think sound right, even if you're only making an estimated guess based on the information. If you're not like fully solving the problem, you're just making an estimate based on, depending on how you solve each problem. And remember too, that there are always many, like in most cases for each problem, there are many different ways you can solve a problem. You always want to default to the one that makes the most sense for you, that's easiest for you. Okay. And that will vary from student to student. Some of you might prefer the simpler way, others might think more on in connection to higher level math that you've been working on lately. Others might be focused on just trying to plug in numbers here and there. Plugging in numbers is a good strategy too. So trying to look at the information always that's in the question, annotating something like this. I'm that you can use to kind of help you identify keywords. So doing something to help you figure out what the core components are for each question to answer them. Like in question 2, noting the formula here that you have 3r equals 18. And what is the value of 6r plus 3? Okay, so knowing that if you multiply 2 times 3r, how you would get 3r, like what you would need to do to figure out how to solve 3r equals 18. So if you do that, so something like that, if you kind of set it up as 3r, I can kind of see if it'll let me. I might take this question quickly and put it on a whiteboard. So if you go something like here, knowing how to kind of work through a particular problem. So in this case, like knowing what it is that you need to do to solve this. So if you are you would divide 3r equal, like each side of the equation of 3r equals 18 by 3 would give an r value of 6. So you need to kind of figure out what the value of r is first before you can really start figuring out the numerical value you would need here. Okay. So you can do that. So you can divide each section, like you do 3r equals 18. And then you would rewrite it as, I don't have a division symbol here, so I'm going to use the slash as another division symbol, equals 18 divided by 3. Okay, and then you would reduce that. So 3 cancels out, right? So you're left with r equals 18 divided by 3, which is 6. So if r equals 6, where would you go from here to figure out what the value of 6r plus 3 would be? So if you can actually just plug that in. So you have 6r plus 3 would equal what? So we have 6r, so 6 times the value of r, which was 6, right? Plus 3. You follow your order of operations. And that would equal what? So we have 36, right? Plus 3, which would equal 39 here. Okay, and in this case, D is the right answer for D. Okay, so D is the correct answer. 36 is only the value of 6r. So you need to figure out what the value of 6r plus 3 would be. And once you solve for the value of r, it's just a simple plugging in the number. Okay, so that's one way that you could kind of approach this. So you just need to be able to recognize that you have to figure out what the value of r is in order to determine what 6r plus 3 would be. Okay, so that's one example. If we kind of go back to our math test, if I can find it. Seriously, I always have too many windows open. There we are. Okay. Okay, so that one was a pretty simple question to answer. We would have identified kind of key information here in terms of kind of identifying there we are. That's what I wanted. So we would have kind of gone through and identified that 3r equals 18 would be something that I'd want. right? To identify in this question. I want to know what the value would be for 6R plus 6R plus 3. Okay, so I'm solving. It won't let me. Okay, so basically that's what you're doing. Solve for R, then plugging in the value to find the answer of the expression. That's exactly what we did. Okay, so this might be some way that I would annotate this to find out, and then I might even go, I would cross off these. I might do a diagonal slash, but that would be what I would do, and I would circle my answer, the answer choice. Okay, so that would be something that I would do to solve this particular problem. And I would have written out the, just like we did on the whiteboard, on the digital whiteboard, how to solve that step by step by starting with my equation, just like we see here. So I would have, so we have the question here, and then I would put 3R equals 18. And then below that, rewrite my problem so that I'm solving it. So I'm always keeping in mind what my original equation was that I started with, and then simplifying and showing all my steps. Okay. So you can then just plug in the numbers and you solve it. Okay. So that's one way that you could approach this type of question. I think that is kind of helpful to see what I would do for this type of math question. Kind of continuing with that, if you were to look here and we were to do kind of annotations of identifying key ideas that we might want to kind of take away. A painter will paint end walls with the same size and shape in a building using a specific brand of paint. Okay, so we have end walls, same size and shape. The painter's fee can be calculated by the expression NKLH. So here, where N is the number of walls, K is a constant with units of dollars per square foot, L is the length of each wall in feet, and H is the height of each wall in feet. Okay, so if we're kind of thinking about that, if the customer asks the painter to use a more expensive brand, which of the factors in the expression would change? Okay, so using a specific brand of paint becomes an important detail. Okay, so initially when we're just looking at that, like if we just started reading through this, using a specific brand of paint might not seem like an important detail to us, but by the time we get to the bottom here, it is, because they're asking us to consider which one of these might be a factor in terms of what the total, what it is that we're trying to solve for. Okay, so in this case with question 1, we're really kind of looking at, we look at our formula. So we know the number of walls. We know that K is a constant with units of dollars per square foot. Okay, L is the length of each wall in feet, and the height of each wall in feet. Okay, so we know that the height of our room isn't changing. The length of each wall isn't changing. The number of walls is not changing. But the K, the constant, might change based on the type of paint we're using. Okay. So in this case, C is the correct answer. I mean, we don't even have to actually solve anything here. We can just look at this question and break it down by its component parts and figure out that K is the best answer choice because that's what's going to change. The number of walls won't change in terms of our solving, and it won't change the height of each wall or the length of each wall in feet. Okay, so none of those parameters that we need to actually solve for none of the parameters specifically for the job have changed other than the paint. And so the paint that we're using will change based on the units of dollars per square foot, the constant that we're dealing with in terms of price of the paint. Okay, so for what the price of the paint, that would be what would change. Okay, so K makes the most sense. Okay. If we even look at 3, so we didn't even have to actually do any math here. We only had to figure out based on the information they gave us. So you want to watch out for circumstances like that, and also note that it's important to underline, to circle values. So I could even have circled N, but for the sake of doing this online, it made more sense to kind of just underline things here. Okay, and also to keep things together, like N corresponding to the number of walls is why I underlined it instead of circling it. Although I circled it up here, N walls, that's a quantity here. But everything else needed to be connected to what it is, what that variable is representing. Okay. Does that kind of make sense to everyone so far? Really? All right, so I'm not going to go through everything, but basically, like even like for question 3, knowing how to solve a radical expression, like which of the following is equal to A to the 2 divided by 3, third power for all values of A. So that requires you knowing how to deal with powers, right? It also has to do like knowing that you have to how to deal with positive integers and integers in general. So knowing power property of exponents, knowing things like kind of knowing how to apply the definition of the power property of exponents to that expression, and how to solve using radicals and what you're dealing with, just to kind of figure out. So like the kind of principle that we're working with is, I don't know if it's going to let me, but basically A, yeah, it won't let me unless I do text messages, text for here, but it's A to the 1 over N power equals the square root of N, the square root of A to the N, basically. So you're dealing with something that would look like, I guess I can try it. I mean, because we know that A, nope, it's not going to let me. So, okay, so if we do A, I'm going to, so that's representing a caret to show them using the power. Okay, because I can't actually put the power in here. So A to the M divided by N power would equal basically N. So just it would look like here, except that it would have an N here to the square root of A to the Mth power. Okay, that's kind of what we'd be dealing with. So it would look like, I mean, D is actually the correct answer. So this one is incorrect. this one's incorrect, that's incorrect, and this one's incorrect. D is the correct answer. So it's the so D is the right one. Okay, so you're basically looking for an equivalent form. I mean, that's kind of what it boils down to, is knowing the property of the power property of exponents. So how to deal with powers in exponents, and what that would represent and look like, and how to put it in an equivalent form using a radical sign. I mean, that's ultimately what this question is about. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so kind of moving on, we only have about 15 more minutes left. There are, like, one of the key concepts that you really want to know are algebraic expressions and equations, how to use them, how to solve them, knowing things like equivalent forms and like between the standard form and knowing how to an expanded form or different things like that for numbers, as well as being able to how to apply different properties to rephrase, basically to reorganize the numbers so that they represent their equivalent expressions. So that a lot of it has to do with manipulation of numbers and variables so that you can create and use an equivalent form that matches your situation that you need, okay, or what you're being asked to solve for. A lot of it is finding information in your question. So like this first question, you didn't even have to do any math. Sometimes you do have to do math in addition to doing these kinds of detailed identifications here, but we were dealing all with variables, which is possible. Or you could be dealing with a combination of variables and numbers that you have to then solve for in certain cases. Being able to deal with data sets, being able to identify kind of how to deal with coordinate points, how to deal with functions, how to kind of deal with polynomials, knowing what they are, knowing what different shapes are in terms of two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes, and or figures, and dealing with like basic geometry concepts related to those in terms of area, in terms of perimeter and volume or circumference. Dealing with properties of things like triangles. All of these are kind of key ideas that you want to familiarize yourself with. Dealing with degrees, recognizing when a figure is not drawn to scale and how that can affect your understanding of what's being talked about here or being expressed in an image form, okay? Being able to determine logic and figure out based on, like in this question, in the figure above, lines K, L, and M intersect at a point. If X plus Y equals U plus W, which of the following must be true? So that means that you have to figure out, based on logic and based on what you know from the image, the infographic here, but also from your knowledge of what these concepts are representing. So what it means when you're dealing with degrees and dealing with intersecting lines or things like that, that you have to be able to understand how to make those connections to figure out the right relationship so that you can make the appropriate conclusion. So a lot of this has to do more with your ability to find and interpret information than it is so much on your ability to solve a question. A lot of the, I mean, you do still have to solve questions. Like here, we're dealing with the graph, like which of the following is equal to D. You have to figure that out, and kind of figure out based on the information that you have with the graph of the equation. Here you're dealing with an XY plane where you have a parabola, and understanding like the rules and things related to parabolas, understanding how things intersect with a line or with an equation at two different points, and how to express that when you're dealing with things like line segments and algebraic type of equations, or what the formula is for a line, the slope of a line, a straight line, what to do when you're dealing with things like temperature, or you're dealing with kind of situations where you have a lot of variables up here, or you have like what looks like a complex expression, and that you have to figure out what A equal, you have to solve for something. So you have to, where A is a constant, and knowing what that means by it being a constant. These are all kinds of key things that you want to review. And the same is true for the kind of short response ones, where you have to figure out one possible solution to an equation, or figure out the value of X based on this information, or figure out and know what it means when you're dealing with isosceles triangles, what properties of isosceles triangles are, and how that might influence or affect your understanding and interpretation of this, and how to solve for it, to figure out what the value of X degrees is based on this information. Okay. So yeah, it seems like it is a lot in dealing with things like sine of F. So you're dealing with things like a little bit of trigonometry and trigon analysis here, dealing with understanding kind of how to deal with angles, how to deal with degrees, how to kind of graph them, and understand how things kind of interact with one another. So these are kind of key concepts you want to review, as well as, again, always familiarizing yourself with the information that they give you. So things like what these formulas mean, how to manipulate them to represent to solve for each of these, like how you would, if you needed to figure out what the value of R would be, if you knew what the area was, and you know the approximate value of pi, how you could manipulate this equation to solve for R, the value of the radius, how to kind of, if you know what the base is, but you don't know what the height is, but you know what the area is, how do you figure out what the value of the height is, based on the information that you have. Also knowing how to use and what the Pythagorean theorem represents, and how to not only use it, but how to manipulate it into other forms, so that you can solve for component parts of this. Okay, and kind of understanding the principles behind it, dealing with kind of special right triangles and those kinds of principles, dealing with the degrees and things as well, knowing like arc, the number of degrees of arc in a circle, radians of arc in a circle, knowing what those mean, and knowing what the degrees of the angles of a triangle is, and how that can affect how you interpret information, and how to deal with kind of rectangular prisms, cylinders, spheres, dealing with kind of all of these different three-dimensional figures, but also dealing with the two-dimensional kind of equivalents, and how to kind of solve for all their component parts. I think that that's something too that you need to look at, and being able to interpret data from charts, being able to find the elements, the information from each section. These are the types of things that you need to be able to do. So it's very similar to the kinds of problems that I think that you get most of the time for your schoolwork. So it's really not that much of a stretch, but it is dealing with a lot more concepts than you usually focus on at once, because you're kind of using what you learned over the years with math and applying them in this context for a real world situation is what they're trying to get you to simulate here. Okay, so we only have about 6 more minutes. Did anyone have any particular questions from section 3 or section 4 that I mean, I haven't really addressed things from section 4 specifically, but or content questions about math that they're really confused about that you need me to go over? We only have about 6 minutes for today, but no one had come forward with questions, and the lighting in here is that light is bothering me with the sunlight coming in. So if no one has any specific questions, I'm going to guess that you understand what these what your math errors are. Like the two main math errors that you end up making are, one, careless mistakes because you didn't show your work or you miscalculated. You made an error somewhere in your calculations and you just human error there. That's understandable. That happens to everyone. But one thing to do to correct that is always read very carefully, annotate your questions, just like we did at the very beginning here. If we get to, just like you can kind of see me doing here. Okay. And also like when we solved this question, I actually broke it down step by step. I didn't skip any steps. You never want to skip steps. Skipping steps means that someone's going to somewhere not be able to follow your train of thought and you're going to make an error, or someone's going to say, how did you solve this? I can't follow what you did, and you're not going to get credit where credit's due, okay, for solving it. So everyone always needs to show their work. That's why you're given scrap paper. That's why you're given space to do your kind of figuring here, your kind of solving step by step. You also want to make sure, like, so that'll correct a lot of like doing careful reading, doing circling, doing underlining of key terms and figuring out what it is you actually have to solve for. And then showing all of your work is always going to help you to prevent those kind of careless errors that can happen. Okay, so that's the easiest way you can gain new points on this test, the math test, is to make sure you are doing that. You are doing the annotations in the questions, figuring out and determining what it is you have to solve for, noting key information in the questions, in the each question and the information that is related to it, so that you can find that information that you need to help you solve the question as quickly as possible and in the easiest manner for you. Okay. And sometimes you are going to get a question where you don't actually have to do any math. You just have to figure out how, analyze and interpret which of these would make the most sense. So try to take advantage of those when you can, so you can move on to other questions that might take longer for you to solve. Always start with the easier questions. These are kind of key things that we've been going over for the last few weeks that you need to make sure you're doing. Bigger, more severe type of errors happen when you don't understand a concept or you don't understand what a question is asking. And how to apply it. So you might make an error in understanding the question. That's why practicing each of these types of common skills, like dealing with functions or dealing with polynomials or algebraic expressions or equations, those types of things, and how to kind of work with them and what the rules are that apply to them. Being familiar with those and refreshing your memory on those is going to help you solve those bigger content issues that have to do more with your understanding of particular math concepts, okay, as opposed to making simple calculation errors or careless reading errors, okay. Awesome work today. If anyone has any questions from this test that you didn't get to ask, please email me. As always, you're welcome to, and we can kind of go from there. If you don't ask questions, I won't know that you have a question on a particular math concept or any other area of the exam. So please tell me. Awesome work. We have about 2 more minutes left. So I'm going to kind of go over what our homework is. I will give you your homework, of course, through an email. So you will see what what specifically we have for homework. So I did kind of mention this at the beginning of class. We are in week 6 right now. So next week is week 7. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We're in week 7 now. I did say that at the beginning. So week 7. So we are focusing for homework on practice test 7. You have reading for chapters 20 to 21. I know the syllabus or the notes kind of say chapter 14, but I also had chapter 14 assigned the previous week. So unless you didn't get a chance to read it, you can read chapter 14, but otherwise you should just have 20 to 21 to really focus on. Review your notes because next week is our last session. So you want to make sure that you understand your strategies, how to proceed. Okay. And I'll send out the homework email as soon as possible. Okay. So everyone can get started on the next practice test. Okay. Which is practice test 7. Awesome work, everyone. I will see everyone next Saturday for our last class. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and please remember to contact us at info@embracetutoring.com to set up any personalized private tutoring sessions you would like. Stay tuned for future videos, and best of luck with your studies. We definitely encourage you to visit our Instagram as well as TikTok pages if you have any questions along the way. Take care, guys. Best of luck with your studies.